All right, Jake, welcome to the Jump Search Talent Show here. We have a great guest here, Jake Reni. And before I jump into introducing Jake, I want to give a little plug for ourselves. Michelle and I run the Jump Search Talent Show. We are working with Jump Search Recruiting, and we help companies hire and scale their teams. And we also help folks with navigating their job search. It's tough out there. So today we have an awesome guest, Jake Reni, who has tons of experience in terms of sales. And I'm so excited to welcome him here so that we can learn, we and you out there in the audience can learn from him and his sales experience. Recruiting it's part of a lot of folks say that it's kind of like a sales job, which I think it is, but I have no formal professional experience or formal professional training. So I'm looking forward to learning from Jake here. Jake has more than 15 years in high tech and SaaS sales experience. He's built the Adobe Sales Academy. He's founded his own fractional CRO consultancy. And he's also a renowned top 100 sales coach on LinkedIn. And so we're looking forward to diving in deeper into Jake's approach to sales and what we can learn as job seekers and folks that are trying to navigate our careers more effectively, as well as a lot of folks out there. I know that at some point, if not right now, you'll be hiring and building your own team. And so Jake has a lot of perspective that he can share in that vein. So without further ado, Jake, welcome. It's great to have you.
Eric, Michelle, thank you. I'm stoked to be on with you guys today.
Yeah, welcome.
So Jake, maybe give us a little bit of background. I know I gave a little bit of an intro, but would love to hear a little bit more about kind of where you're coming from and how did you get into sales, right? I'd love to hear that story and kind of where you came from, and why don't we dive in right there?
Geez, well, I guess maybe to better know my origin story or exposure to sales would be going way back to when I was really young. See, both my parents were immigrants to this country just right before I was born, and essentially like had to start all over. And like they had nothing, we had nothing, and there's two young kids. And my mom came from back where she's from, a small island called Curacao. She ran a TV show, a radio show. She was, somewhat of a socialite on her island. Everybody knew who she was. My dad came from Italy as an engineer and had a professional experience back there. But when they came to the US, they had to start all over. And so I remember as a kid growing up going with my dad to his office. Back then in the 80s, he was working for a teeny tiny little startup nobody had ever heard of before called Apple Computer, which was at the stage of like failing. But I have vivid memories of running around the office there, playing video games in the arcade and just thinking how cool the tech environment was. And then I'd go with my mom. She had to pick up working a job as a real estate agent. I'd go with her to the real estate office and listen to her doing sales calls. And I just remember, picking up on seeing how awesome my parents were and what they were doing and active, and really honestly admiring my mother for the hard work that she was doing. I always just thought it was really cool to see her with her briefcase. So that really, I think, would maybe be the genesis of it, but not exactly where my career got started.
Yeah. Jake, what was your dad doing at Apple?
He's an electrical engineer. So early on, if you take a look at some of the old patents, my dad was part of the first ever MacBook. I guess back then it was PowerBooks that they ever designed. Yeah.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, it's like, I was going to say, you saw the intersection between technology.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's old school technology, but you also saw the intersection with sales. So it kind of,
right.
You have your background kind of married the two.
That's totally right. And I didn't even realize that till later in my life.
Yeah. So, I mean, as a child, I was kind of watching your parents, your dad, I don't want to stereotype here, but him being an engineer, probably much more analytical, your mom being in sales, maybe a little bit more extroverted. What did you learn from both of them growing up?
Jeez. Well, there's not a stereotype in their case. You're lucky because you nailed them both. But my dad, we always called my dad the nutty professor growing up, because like he was just this like absent-minded professor, and he's just this like brilliant guy, just brilliant. Now he works on aerospace and stuff that honestly, like, confidentially can't even talk about it, but it's Mars spacecraft stuff, and it's just super cool things. And then I think the biggest thing I learned from observing the two is that the unique convergence of two very different people can balance out one another so well. Because my mom's an island girl, super laid back, very easygoing. My dad's, like you said, very rigid, analytical, science based in a sense. And just watching the two of them try to communicate was hilarious to me, but somehow it worked. And I think, I credit it for the reason why me and my siblings, there's six of us, are balanced in so many ways. Not just that, but also culturally. My parents didn't even speak the same language when they met. My mom spoke 8 languages, but not Italian. My dad didn't speak anything other than Italian. But just like being raised around that and culturally and seeing how they like work together and communicate, I really saw how just hard work and love can really balance out a lot more than just all the needs that you might have early on growing up. And we didn't have a lot of money, man. We were poor. We were in and out of trailer parks all the time.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
I mean, that's crazy how your parents didn't speak the same language when they first met. I don't even know how that would work, but
My mom spoke between my mom's Spanish and Portuguese. She figured it out pretty dang quick. She's
yeah.
remarkable. She's an incredibly intelligent woman.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
It sounds like I
oh,
was
go
going
ahead,
to say
Michelle.
that it sounds like, I mean, you've kind of come from really humble beginnings, and uh, was that, I guess, did that help you throughout your career in terms of like whether it's hustling? You mentioned that you were in trailer parks. I mean, did that kind of leave an impression in terms of your career and what you
Yeah,
wanted to achieve?
absolutely. I mean, um, when you live this way, nothing is given, nothing is entitled. I mean, everything is gained on merit and effort. And I watched my dad work his butt off. Back then in the 80s, he wasn't making a lot at Apple, and at one point Apple was failing, and that's when eventually he moved on in his career. But the hard work and the grit that I watched my parents give into giving us a better life, right? Their whole purpose of coming to the U.S. was to give their children a better life than they had had. And they worked their butts off to do it. And then they reminded us every single day how hard they worked their butts off so that we would work harder than they did. And that, I think, for those of you who might be children to first generation parents, you get that. Like, yeah, they sacrificed everything to give you what you have. There is no sense of entitlement. And I value that a lot. I believe now that bleeds into my philosophy on, this life is a meritocracy, and everything we do is based on merit, and we're entitled to nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you really got to earn your keep, or eat what you kill, so to speak. Um,
Totally.
so talk to me a little bit about sort of how you got into sales. I mean, you mentioned that in 2019 you landed your first position in medical device sales. Um,
Hmm.
how did you break into that, and what was sort of the impetus there?
So it's earlier than that, right? I I'll say one last thing from my childhood and bridge that into my first job. But
Yeah.
I remember as a kid, my mom always told me I was going to be a great salesman. She would always bring me along with her to this like annual charity event for Christmas to help her sell ornaments, and I'd always outsell my siblings. And she'd always tell me, I was going to be a salesperson one day, and I didn't know what that meant. But what I think where that came together for me was later on. I was in college at Utah State. This was probably back in 2007 ish, and school wasn't for me. I was struggling. At the time, I didn't know I was dyslexic. I didn't understand how bad my ADHD was. I'd never been diagnosed, and I just struggled in school. But I had a good mentor that looked out for me, and he had moved to Vegas to start up a medical device company, and called me up one day. And I remember I remember exactly where I was. I was laying in bed thinking to myself, how am I going to get through school? I suck at this. And he hit me up. I picked up the phone. He goes, Jake, what are you doing? Do you want to move down to Vegas and help me start up this medical device company? We're going to sell some wheelchairs. And I was like, yeah, sure. Anything to get me out of this dorm room. And literally like a week later, packed up all my stuff, like a pair of skate shoes, a trash bag full of clothes. And I drove down to Vegas and I started selling wheelchairs.
Man, so was that it sounded like that was an easy decision for you. I mean, you were struggling with dyslexia, which could really
Yeah.
impact your experience in an academic setting, and you felt like this was sort of a path to start off your career at the time. Is that right?
Yeah. I thought, well, hey, my mom always said I was good at sales. This guy believes in me. And I think that says a lot, when people when people bet on you and believe in you, you don't want to let them down. I wanted to prove them right. And like I said, like nothing was ever, I never had a philosophy that nothing was ever, I guess, entitled. And so I saw this opportunity. He was giving it to me. I thought, let me take a shot. School's not working for me. And so, yeah, I don't know if it was an easy decision, but it was a decision that came together pretty quickly for me, even if it meant moving out of state for the first time.
And this gentleman, you said he was a mentor of yours?
I got to know him through school. We were in the same fraternity. And, shout out to Mike Bergs. He's the guy that took care of me. And he just, in terms of the fraternity, he was my big brother. So he looked out for me in college, made sure I was going to class. And this guy he was a real mentor. I mean, he would call me, Jake, are you up? Are you going to school today? Like, how are things going? He was always checking on me. He knew me really well.
So what did your mom and what did your mentor, what did they see in you that maybe you didn't see it in yourself maybe initially?
Probably how relentless I am about achieving the things I want to get to. Like I am relentless, and I don't give up. I'll figure out ways, even if it's unconventional. I don't cut corners, but I figure out ways sometimes to blow through walls if I have to, right? And I think that's something my mom always saw, that I like never gave up. She always told me I never gave up. And even to a point like where they gave me the nickname as a kid in Italian called terremoto, which means like tornado, because I just went through everything. And I think Mike saw that in me too. Like he gave me a role as a freshman to take on some responsibilities with the fraternity and liaisoning between the university, and saw what I did there. And I think that ultimately led them to seeing that there was more in me than I even saw myself.
Yeah.
Jake, I'm kind of curious. What's a fun story that you can share about kind of your relentless nature, and how did that help you in your career, your sales career?
Oh, geez. Specifically tied to my career. Well, I'll tell you, like starting out my first job, right? Like I moved to Vegas. I was selling wheelchairs. By the way, my salary was $0, but I made $1,000 a chair. And so I told myself, well, I'm just going to have to sell a crap load of chairs to make some money. And so I just remember getting out and knocking doors all day long. And I would make a goal to knock somewhere between 30 and 60 physician offices every single day. And I did it. I did it every single day. When I got to the point where I was selling 1 chair, 2 chairs, and then before I knew it, I was selling 5 chairs a month. And at that stage in my life, making $5,000 a month, that was a lot of money. And so from there, I wanted to get creative of like, how can I do this differently? So I started looking at partnerships with the hospitals, with different clinics, with different home hospice centers, and figured out ways to go from 1 unit an order to maybe like 5 units per order with multiple, partnerships. And that grittiness and that relentlessness taught me ways to think beyond just this, the traditional sales approach.
Yeah, I love how you take something and you're thinking creatively and out of the box, and I feel like there's like a scrappy nature, but it's actually a really positive thing. It's like that scrappy nature where you're trying to figure out how to increase your sales, but you're like trying to scale it. Something that doesn't normally, and maybe maybe you're just thinking in like most people are thinking, okay, I'm going to sell 1 unit, another unit, but you're thinking, how do I scale this?
It's my whole career.
So I love that.
My whole career was like that, Michelle, because like after that, I went into respiratory and oxygen, because I saw the reps that I was coming across all the time, and they were dressed a little bit nicer than I was, and they were doing something a little more interesting, and I wanted to see what they were doing. And so I got myself a job into selling respiratory and oxygen, and I wanted to outdo everyone. So I got into the #1 hospital in the world and into the US, and then for respiratory. And then I landed a national study with them. And then I locked in a hospital system. And before I knew it, I turned a territory. It was like 60 out of 60 in the US for this company into like #1, because again, I was always looking at how can I go bigger? If I can do this, well, I could probably do more. I could probably, like, how can I do more efficiently? And so I was always looking for angles. And that led from whether I was doing oxygen to later on in my life in surgical, selling to big hospital conglomerate systems and locking in multi-million-dollar contracts. It was just, I don't want to do it the same way everyone else is doing it, because that just makes me a competition. I want to go bigger to completely shoot them, like just lock them out.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the big lessons you've learned here throughout your sales career that you would say are pretty pivotal? Because, right now there's a lot of folks out there. I mean, to sell is human. I think that's the name of a book, right? But it speaks
Yeah.
volumes because, um, to sell is to stand for something, right? And it's to share that with others such that they can understand where you stand. And, maybe it's part of a buying process or whatnot. But broadly speaking, sales is like integral to who we are as humans and how we express ourselves, I believe. And when you think about a lot of the folks out there that are, managing their career or navigating a job search, a lot of them, don't have professional sales training, and so um, I'm really looking to diving into this a little bit more with you, Jake, because it feels like you bring such a wealth of knowledge that could be applied to helping folks manage their career and navigate their job search, present themselves more effectively. And so maybe we could dive into some of the top lessons that you've learned in your experience in sales that might translate into that person out there that's looking to navigate their search or further their
Yeah.
personal brand. Um, can you speak on some of the lessons that you've learned? Maybe some of the key
Yeah.
lessons
Yeah.
you've learned.
Yeah. I tell you that one of the first lessons I probably learned in my career was to always stay principally based in my work, and to be curious about solving big problems for my clients as opposed to just chasing a commission check. And what I mean by that is I had an experience early on in my career, that first job, where a physician pulled me aside. This was in Vegas, and he said to me, "Hey, Jake, I write a lot of prescriptions every single year for wheelchairs. Um, you know, your competitor, he gives me a kickback for every chair. I get $200 from him, and I'm like, I'm signing about 15 to 20 every single year. I mean, every single month. Would you be willing to do that kickback with me?" And I remember in that moment, like there was no hesitation. There was no thought. My immediate reaction to this guy was, look, if you want to put yourself at risk of losing your medical license and losing your entitlement to Medicare practicing and Medicaid, go for it. But I won't do business that way. And it was just a realization walking out of there was like, I don't need to win just to win. And if cheating or stepping on people's necks or whatever it takes to get there, that wasn't going to be my approach. So early on, I wanted to solve meaningful problems, and do it in a principally based way. That was critical to me. I think too, um, network was a really, really important lesson early on. Um, Shortly after my second job, my wife was incredibly sick with our first child. I almost lost her. She got really sick with something called hyperemesis. She was on a feeding tube PICC line. I mean, she lost 30 pounds from the day we
Wow.
got pregnant to the day I gave birth. She couldn't
Wow.
eat at all. She got sick, septic. It was just wild. And I had an employer who didn't understand the needs I had to go take care of her, and ended up letting me go. And so at the peak of kind of the downturn in the market in 2007, 2008, it was actually 2008-ish. I had to go find a job. I had a pregnant wife. I had credit like $20,000 in medical bills. I was still pretty much newlywed. And I just went out and started networking with everybody. And I was also living in Colorado. I didn't know anybody. We had no family, no friends there, nothing. And I just started networking with different groups, starting to meet different people, starting to offer people, taking them to lunch. And like, I made it a full-time job to buy people lunch and coffee. And that is what landed me one of the most pivotal jobs in my whole career, starting at Cook Medical, where a guy named Chris Dana saw something in me and gave me a chance. And that changed everything in my career. That's what took me from a salesperson to a professional. So you understanding that your network is your net worth as an early stage salesperson will change the way you succeed. And I think the third thing, what I'll say is, I think putting in the work, the grit, the grind, like be curious. If you're curious about understanding what it is that your customers, your clients, your partners are challenged with and what they're trying to solve, and you're creative, you can solve a lot of problems. And so I think those three things are probably some of the biggest lessons I learned early on in my career.
Yeah, it's interesting. This just the idea of grit, and you mentioned earlier about just banging on people's doors, and
Hmm.
there's a lot of folks right now that are just applying to the front door, um, and some of these job positions are getting like hundreds, if not thousands, of applicants for a single job role, and it can be really frustrating out there. And I know that this crosses a lot of people's minds. Is like I want to work hard, but I don't know if I'm channeling my energy into the right way, right? Am I giving up too soon, or should
Hmm.
I be giving up sooner to pivot into something that's more effective, more creative, for example? And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but it's a challenging thing, because especially with folks that they're not professional job seekers, right? They're job seeking every few years, right? Every 2, 3, 5, 6. So some is like 10, 15 years they haven't been looking for a job. So they're not really sure if they're if they're doing the right thing. But going back to your principle based approach, what are some of the principles that you've that have sort of led you to your success, that that regardless of what the environment's like or whatnot, if you just align yourself with these principles and keep you add hard work to that, you're going to end out on top. I guess any thoughts on some of those principles that have you found to be really foundational for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Hard work is a given. I don't need to say much about that
Yeah.
one. Um, what also like is a big one is self-awareness has been a big one that's has helped me become aware of what of just like myself, the things I need to improve, how I need to develop the areas and the gaps in my skills. But then the third I would say is consistency. So when you said earlier, like some people are like ready to give up, I don't know if I'm investing my time in the right place. What I'd tell you is, man, if it wasn't for my wife early on in my career, I probably would have questioned myself a lot. And I remember one conversation early on when I was trying to find jobs after I got laid off from this company when she was sick. And she said, dude, you got to decide, like, where is it that you want to go? I remember thinking to myself, like, what do you mean? Like, I just want to be in sales. And she's like, no, I want, like, write it down. What do you want to do in your career? Where do you want to be? What do you want to accomplish? And how do you want to get there? And I thought, well, okay. And so I went through this exercise and kind of like wrote down the type of job I wanted, the type of sales career I wanted. I got very specific. And then all of a sudden, like, it came into focus of, okay, I need to be putting my energy here. So what I'll tell you is, if you know where you're going, then never give up, right? Like never question yourself if the effort is worth it, because you are going to get a lot of no's. You are going to get shut down a ton. You're going to be told you're underqualified. You're going to be told you're overqualified. You're going to be told that you were this close, but the person next to you had a master's degree or had just a general degree. Like you're going to be hearing no a ton. But if you know the direction you want to go and how you want to get there, then there's no sense in giving up.
Yeah, you mentioned a minute ago, and I didn't catch his name, but the person that saw something in you and really helped take you from being, a salesperson to a real professional.
Hmm.
Um, what you know, how, so much of it is how do you connect with the folks that see something in you that you don't, right?
Hmm.
And when you meet these people, you have to sort of, I guess, when you meet these kinds of people, how do you identify them, and how do you ensure that they can play a more meaningful part in your life? So, for example, you mentioned a mentor before. Um, how do you have you like sought formal relationship, like formal mentor mentee relationships with them, or how do you keep them in your orbit so that
Yeah.
they can sort of champion you and inspire you?
Yeah. Those that first big role I got at Cook Medical while I was unemployed came from a couple different mentors. And I tried different things out, trying to ask people for help. And what I realized quickly was, one, there's a lot of people out there that actually want to help. They want to contribute to others, and because they've been there. And if it wasn't for people who gave them time and saw something in them, they wouldn't be where they're at. And so there are more people than you think want to give back, and you just have to ask. The other thing I realized is I had to be very specific about those asks. And so this one guy, Denny Guest, who like put me on the path to finding this job, um, I deliberately remember going to him and saying, "Hey, Denny, would you be open to being my mentor?" And what I have in mind is, could we get together for breakfast once a month? And I want to tell you about my job search. I want you to hold me accountable. Can you help me to role play? Just and he said yes. And that job, like he got pretty soon, he got invested in me and started connecting me with his network, and his network expanded to, up their network. And before I knew it, I was connecting to a role with a competitor of his selling against him, but he didn't care because he was invested in me. And that's the power, of what mentors can do for you is you can ask deliberately, and you will know who they are because they are willing to give of their time, maybe not necessarily totally freely, but generally freely. And that's pretty
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah. I think one thing that you mentioned here is the ask,
Mm-hmm.
the power of the ask, right? And why do people shy away from the ask? I think a lot of it has to do with rejection, right? You expose
Totally.
yourself, but you get to the no faster, so you can focus on the maybes and push them to yeses faster, right? And I guess any advice for sort of nurturing one's ability to make an ask, and then how do you make an ask? So for candidates, like, what is your thought about how candidates can integrate the power of asking into their job search? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, if you've been listening, for those who are listening to this, you haven't heard me once talk about how many places I necessarily like applied to and waited for them to come to me, right? It was all about me going to my network and asking. And so what I tell you is, don't go about your job search just like every other candidate in the world who's applying, and you're going to become a statistic of whatever percentage of job applicants on LinkedIn get their resumes pulled. The best way you can do this is by seeking out people in the industry you want to get into, people at the companies you want to work at, people in the role that you want to be doing, and ask them for time. Ask them if you can even pay for their time. Ask them if you can take them out for lunch or dinner or whatever it is. And eventually someone's going to say, absolutely, tell me all about what you're doing. And that tell me all about it is that person who you'll find is willing to give you time.
And I want to highlight here, because you did mention something about networking, but also having a direct ask. Because I think we get asked because we're recruiters, right? And a lot of candidates come to us and they're asking about candidate market fit, but sometimes their ask is not very succinct and direct, and it's like, oh, what do you think I should what kind of job do you think I should get? And so it sounds, I think, Jake, what is important here is you got to be really clear, crystal clear about what you're asking for.
Right. And you can't know what you're asking for if you don't sit down with yourself and have that exercise I was talking about of asking yourself, where do I want to go? What do I want to be?
Yeah.
What do I want to accomplish? What kind of role do I want to be in? How long do I want to do it? Where do I want to go from there? Have that conversation with yourself first. Then you know the path that you want to chart, and then the people along that path that you need to make those asks to. It becomes very, very like digestible when you think about it that way. Otherwise, it's like really scary.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing that you would do with mentors. You don't just blindly go up to them and say, hey, I need your time. You have a very specific ask in mind.
Yeah, very specific. I see what you're doing. I know you're in the similar space. I'm wanting to break in this space. Could I buy you a coffee and just share some of my thoughts of the direction I'm going? What I've learned quickly is asking people to get you an introduction inside of their company, or if there's a job that they can offer you, did not go so well. But asking people for their time to give you feedback on the approach that you're taking, I found that everybody was willing to give insight.
That's a really great distinct point. But go ahead there.
Yeah, and just going back to your point, Jake, about doing the homework and sort of writing down and thinking about, reflecting on, that whole exercise that you described is really, in my mind, that's getting to know yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And when you get to know yourself, you get an understanding of where you stand. And when you have an understanding of where you stand, I mean, that's like rock solid for you to make a compelling pitch or to sell yourself, right? And it just feels foundational, that exercise. One thing that we recommend with people that are job seeking is, because so many people want to just start with their resume, and it seems like the obvious place, right? But I like to take it sort of upstream a little bit and say, well, why don't you do a little bit of homework on reflecting on yourself and where you're coming from, where you've been, where you've succeeded, where you've failed, and sort of use that as sort of the foundation for creating a resume, or actually use that as a foundation to figure out where you want to go and how that translates into the market and what you bring to the market, and then translating that into a resume. But too many people want to just, I just got to polish up my resume, and so it gets sort of diluted, right? Because the resume ends up having everything.
Yeah.
And so, but the exercise you describe, I think, is it really matches kind of the approach that we take in terms of helping job seekers. Because when you're job seeking, you are pitching yourself, right? You are presenting yourself in a way that stands for something, and hopefully it aligns with what what company or position you're applying for. And when there's alignment, chances are you have a higher likelihood of moving forward. But,
Totally. Hot take here for a second.
yeah.
I hate resumes. I think they're trash. And maybe this is coming from a guy who, got screened out for majority of the jobs I wanted early on in my career because I didn't have the degree or whatever it was. And so I always got screened on resumes. But, resume parsing, all that stuff is just like, it doesn't tell you anything about who I am in the story. And so what I often have told candidates or people reach out to me for mentorship on their resumes, forget all these things you're trying to fit in here. Think about what are the stories you want to tell. What's your story? You have a story to tell, right? And that's compelling. So what are the stories you want to tell of what you've accomplished and how you can help the company you want to work for accomplish that? Then distill those down into bullets based on what you accomplished in the role that you were at before and the roles you were at previously, and put that into 3 or 4 succinct bullets so that when they ask you about the details of those bullets, boom, you got a story and you can tell your story, as opposed to like all these bullets on a piece of paper that don't really tell the story behind like who Jake is, right? Who Eric is, who Michelle is.
Yeah. No, I love that. And one thing that you mentioned in one of the articles that you wrote, I think this was on, what was this? This was on Selling Power.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned, as a person yourself that's hired and built sales teams, and in terms of what you're looking for, you mentioned that yes, you look for accomplishments, but it doesn't end there, right? Because sometimes accomplishments can be kind of lucky and maybe not repeatable. And so you talked a little bit about that's sort of being the what, right? The accomplishments, but you lend a lot of credence to how. How was that accomplishment realized? And so can you talk on that a little bit?
Absolutely. Like I have interviewed probably at this point thousands of sales candidates in my career. I've hired hundreds of sales reps. And what always stands out to me, and is almost like to the point where it's shocking. And I even tempted sometimes to like pause the interview and be like, dude, stop. Sales reps who have accomplished in their career and they're confident, they know what they've done, and it can repeat it, can always tell you the how. They can tell you what their formula is, what their process is, and how they repeat that. And then they tell you how they can take that and apply it to the place that they're going. Because their sales pitch that got them to where they're at in their current company isn't going to work at your new company, right? And the sales tactics aren't going to work either. But their sales process, their the science behind what they do, the formula, like how they break down their day, how they think about their quota, how they back into their number, those things are what really help me differentiate a winning sales rep from a sales rep who's just trying to land the job. And it becomes really apparent really quick because especially sellers, you know who you are. I love you. It's our career. We do this together. But there are some of you who try to sell your careers and what you've done on your resume. And it becomes really apparent pretty quickly that you're embellishing. And when I get into the how, it falls apart. It all falls apart and you can't back your numbers, and I'll do the math with you. And it's always really sad to see like sellers who can't stand behind the math after I start breaking it down. So I guess in short, the summary here is know what your process is, know what your formula is, know what your framework is to achieve those successes over and over again, and tell me that, because that's what tells me like you can repeat it.
I was gonna say, I feel like this is just like a secret that you've kind of revealed in terms of sales, because most recruiters or even hire managers, they look at what people have achieved, but we haven't really looked at how do people do it. And so I feel like that's like a little unknown secret out there that I'm like, wow, okay, that's a great
I was going to
tip
say the
there.
same thing. I was going to say the exact same thing. You know, we try to coach folks on like, oh, you need to quantify your accomplishments and bullet point them succinctly, and that's great. They'll stand on that. It'll stand on its own. It'll tell its own story. But what you're saying, Jake, is that no,
It
it
doesn't.
doesn't
No,
tell this. It doesn't tell a story by itself.
no, because unfortunately, what you're up against is every other sales rep who's lying. And so they all, in the end, everyone has accomplishments. Everyone was really good at their job. And very few people are actually vulnerable about their failures. I actually want to hear more about your failures sometimes than I want to hear about the successes, because I want to know what you learned. But here's the nugget. What I'll tell you is, like, if you really want to crush your sales interview, don't just tell me your quota attainment. Tell me how you did it. So tell me, for the last 3 quarters, this is what I achieved. Here's how I got there. This is the pipeline coverage that I created for myself. I had a 4x pipeline coverage. The way I got to that was that I had to make sure that based on my average deal size of X amount of dollars, I had to close X amount of deals. In order to do that, I booked X amount of meetings. In order to do that, I made X amount of calls. In order to do that, I scheduled my day like this. You can back yourself into that, like, conversation's over. I would say 1% of my interviews, 2% of my interviews go that way. And that really makes you stand apart.
So when you see a great accomplishment on somebody's resume, and it's quantified and it sounds great, what's your follow-up question to that? Like, what is your question? Is it
Well, the next thing I
tell
want to
me?
know is, like, how long did you sustain it, right? So if you had a quota, if you had, it says on there you had 100% of quota attainment in Q4. Awesome. What was your quota? What was your quota in Q3 and in Q2? So what was your overall quota for the attainment for the year? Because that still slowly starts to, like, break down, and they don't remember numbers, and they start to, like, hesitate. And I don't expect everyone to have their numbers memorized perfectly. It's not possible. But I want to know, one, is it sustainable, right? Did they do it over a course of time? Because a lot of sellers, like, hear me on this. A lot of you accomplish, quota for a quarter or maybe 2, and then you think you're ready to move on to the next role, and you're nowhere near that, right? Like, and you think it's time to step up to a new opportunity because the current company you're at doesn't have an opportunity for you to take the next promotion. Don't do that to yourself, because the best place to learn and to step into the new role is actually the company that you're with. You're taking a big risk having to start all over again. And it doesn't just happen after 2 months or 2 quarters. And so I want to know, do you know how to sustain that over time? And the second thing I break down after that is, like, asking them, what did it take to hit that number? So break it down for me. So in Q4, you said you did this. Awesome. How many deals was that? What was your average deal size? What was your close rate? What was your sales cycle? So how many deals did you have to get pipeline coverage, right? And I'll ask those numbers. And what's always interesting is that when it breaks down, the amount of deals that they told me they closed for the average deal size that they told me they closed at, the numbers never add up. It's either like way over or way under. And I'll always do the math with them, and I'll say, hey, hold on, based on this conversation, you're telling me that you hit 100%, but based on this, it sounds like you're averaging closer to like 75%. And then the conversation will change. Like, well, yeah, I was heading there, but then this happened, or they took a territory away from me, and then all of a sudden, like, the real story comes out.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, now let's talk. Okay, we're here now. Now let's talk. What happened?
And then what do you look for at that point?
Honesty, complete honesty. Just be vulnerable. Like, I had an SDR who I had a conversation like this one time, and I broke it down for her pretty quick, and it was pretty clear she was struggling in her final quarter in the role she was in. And I said, well, what happened? And she got honest super fast. And she said, you know what? Honestly, at the end there, I got overconfident. I wasn't putting in the same amount of work that I normally did. I thought that I could get there based on the experience that I had. I thought I had built enough pipeline, and I stopped making as many calls as I normally should have. And I didn't realize it right away, but after about 2 months, it caught up to me pretty quick. And she's like, I learned a really valuable lesson. And I was able to turn things around, but it really, like, I took a hit to my reputation in the company, and some trust eroded with my manager. And I was like, shoot, okay, she knows exactly what she did wrong. That makes me believe that she knew what she was doing before. It also makes me believe that she knows what she needs to do to get back on course. And I hired her, and she was totally killer. She was awesome. But like vulnerability, it is very powerful in interviews. It's much more powerful than complaining about your previous boss or company that was a mess. Just don't do that. Tell me
Oh, we
what you owned, you know?
we hear it a lot. I mean, there's always a lot
Yeah,
of things that you can complain about externally, but it's what did you do with that?
yeah,
It's really what did you take ownership with? It's not, hey, I bounced every 6 months just to find a job that could pay me better. It's what did you do with it?
exactly. And take ownership for the things you failed at, because there's for every story like the one I just told, there's another one where candidates would just continue to push the blame and push blame and push blame. And at that point, like, I know what that tells me. All that tells me is you'll never take accountability in the role that you're going to be in with me, because you're going to push blame and you're going to point fingers. And there's a difference between the rep who constantly, like, there's the rep who can find every reason to pick apart the comp plan, the territory, the quality of the leads, like the product, like, and they put so much effort into complaining about everything. And then there's the rep who puts their head down, stays quiet, and says, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to solve some of these problems along the way, and I'm going to bring the solutions to my manager when I have them. Like, that rep is going places. That's the rep I want on my team. That's who's going to help me build. That's the rep who's going to be successful. And while this rep's complaining over here, getting about 65% of their attainment, this rep's hitting about 140 to 150% of their attainment, right? It's just two different mindsets.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
call that locus of control, right? If it's always external and my circumstances are based on everything else that's happening around me versus what I have agency over, then the person will always tend to blame other situations. They won't take accountability. It sounds like you're able to kind of zero in on that pretty quickly.
Oh yeah, because when you lead big teams in sales, you get exposed to it so much, and maybe it's that sense of entitlement thing that is a stickler for me, but I try to get to the bottom of it pretty quick. Are you an owner of your wins and your failures? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we see it a lot. I'll tell you, like we will go through a candidate's reason for leaving for each job, and we'll go through 3 or 4, and you start to hear this little pattern of, oh, I didn't get the territory, or my manager, sucked, or I didn't get the software, I didn't get the support. Then you start to see a little bit of a pattern. So we like to see people that even if they didn't hit their quota attainment, they owned it. They tried their best, and then the next quarter they really worked at it and did start achieving it.
Totally. And what I'd add to that, to Michelle and Eric right now, is like, look, like, for those of us who are in sales leadership, we know what the industry averages are right now in quota attainment. We know quota attainment's going down. We know it's going way down, and it has consistently over the last 2 to 3 years. We know the average sales rep attainment has begun to decrease. We know the average deal sizes actually have started to decrease. We know that across not only the company that we're at, but our peers and in the industry, this is a trend that's happening overall as a whole, not everywhere, but as a whole. So if you come to me and you tell me a story where you don't necessarily look like a rock star, but you're honest about the effort and the work that you put into, I'm listening, right? And I can work with that.
What other, when you think about your process for engaging a new, jumping on a sales call, because a sales call for you is equivalent to an interview for a job seeker, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the tried and true things that you've done and you've trained your sales team to do in preparation for a sales call? And what are those things that could translate to a job seeker that is trying to do research? How can they make sure that they're channeling the right amount of energy in the right places as they anticipate their upcoming interview?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, you kind of alluded to it quickly there, but the first thing is do your prep work. Do not go into an interview at a company or a place that you want to work and you haven't prepped for the interview. And a quick thing, just like to think about is, I call this like 3x3 method, right? So learn 3 things in like 3 minutes or less, about the company that you want to interview at, and potentially the interview that you're going to be interviewed by. So what I mean by that is like, the industry, right? Maybe the person, their professional background and their experiences, And then maybe something that is the company's been in the news for recently, right? It's very easy to start a conversation with a potential interviewer based on an insight that you learn about the industry or an award the company just won versus like trying to build banter off of the weather. Like that's just like nauseating. Don't do that. Don't be like every other sales rep. Talk about some really cool award they just won for being one of the best places to work for, right? Like tell me about like the article you just read that I wrote, or tell me something about the industry, like the trends that you're learning about that are going on right now in the market that we're in. If you can start showing me that you did your homework, like prep and relevance is very, very powerful for a first interview.
I just want to mention that framework sounds awesome because when I think about what a job seeker is going through today, a lot of times they're preparing to interview for, or they're preparing for to pursue a lot of different opportunities across a lot of different companies. And so having a framework that's efficient where it can create the maximum amount of surface area to launch a meaningful conversation in a very quick time. What did you mention, Jake? 3 minute, 3x3 matrix.
Three things in like 3 minutes or less. And you can spend more time, but like it should be quick. You shouldn't like have to dig deep in the internet, like to figure something out. Just learn. You don't have to sell their product to them. Just learn 3 quick things in 3 minutes or less.
Yeah. I love that.
I love the framework. And Jake, I like to talk about weather, so
don't do that when you're a sales rep, right? Unless you want to talk to me about the snow report and the powder I got.
Oh yes.
Then we can talk.
Yeah, because I know where you're located, so we can definitely talk about it, and we can riff about the snow. But no, I think what you're talking about is don't just go in bantering. You got to come in with substance. And I think we see the same thing, meaning when candidates reach out to us or hiring managers, if they're just like, oh, I'm so interested in working at your company because it's such a big company and it has such prestige. But when they're actually giving you some details like, hey, I did some research and this is really cool. And this is where you guys are going. And this is really meaningful. That's where the substance is, where you're going to perk up and look at the candidate that has substance versus the one that's bantering.
Oh, for real, Michelle. Like I got that a ton at Adobe because a lot of people wanted to work at Adobe. A lot of people see that building every day. It's wild how many times I would hear in interviews, I just drive by this building every single day on my way to work and I just want to work there because it's such a cool building. And I would like think to myself, oh, like that's your reason? Like tell me something like meaningful. Why? Like what's different about it? What are we doing? What are you doing? How does that collide? Like that's just, I don't know. It's just surprising to me sometimes how little effort people put into something that could be an impact in changing their lives. One other thing I'll tell you, it's really important, and I tell my sales reps and I also tell candidates is be yourself. Just be yourself. Don't be nervous. Don't put on a show. Don't pretend to be someone or something you're not. Because also as an interviewer, I'm assessing, cultural impact, right? Not necessarily cultural fit, but like, are you culturally complementing to the team? And what I mean by that too is like, are you bringing diversity in who you are? Is there something unique about you that we don't have on the team right now? Is there a way you think, a way you operate that would help round out the way this team, operates? Like, I want to know you. I don't want to see this fake, rigid, polished side of you because I don't believe that's, how we're going to work together. So bring yourself to the conversation. Don't make yourself so nervous that you pass out. I've had that happen to me before in interviews too. And it's like, I had to go get him a drink of water and help him wake back up.
Jake, you have that effect on people.
Poor girl. She knows who she is. And she got the job, by the way. She was awesome.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
Unless she feigned it.
Was this a pressure interview, Jake?
She was just so nervous and she was so uptight. And then I could tell because like her mouth, she got so cotton mouth, and then she like started like I could see she was like dazing out, and like all of a sudden she lost it and she started like wobbling. I was like, hey, pause. Can we go get a drink of water? And she couldn't even get up at that point. It's just she just got, we get so nervous because we want to be so perfect and we want to like present something that isn't even us. Bring yourself to the table.
There's a lot of folks out there. I mean, by the time a person gets offered an interview, right, especially right now, they've done so many hours of legwork to land that interview. And it's even though it's not a high pressure sort of interview, at least by design, on the part of the company or the interviewer. For them, it's like, oh my gosh, it took me forever to get this interview, and I want to get it right, and so people put a lot of pressure on themselves. They don't want to say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
They're very filtered about how they present themselves. And what you're saying, Jake, is you have to find sort of that comfort of being yourself, right? Because if you end up trying to project somebody or not, and they end up hiring you, they're not hiring the person you are. They're hiring the person
That's
that
right.
you tried to project, right? And so that
Yeah,
could go sideways in so many ways.
totally.
But all right, well, awesome. Jake, any sort of parting insights or advice for job seekers and people that are trying to manage their career more effectively out there, or even people that are trying to hire?
I tell you, the market's interesting right now, right? And there's more AI involved in the resume parsing process than ever before. It's getting harder and harder, I think, to get into the conversation that you want. What I tell you is, one, do the networking that I talked about, but two, don't be afraid to even network to the hiring manager and the recruiter that might be hiring for the role on LinkedIn, and spend time crafting up a very concise and succinct message about why you believe you are the best candidate for the role. I'll tell you, even though I might not respond to every single one with a clear response, because I want to give every candidate an equal opportunity at the interview process, it has resonated with me, and I might flag your resume or your application to my recruiter and say, hey, go make sure this person gets an interview. It's not asking, it's not the, hey, I think I'd be a good fit for this role. Can I get some of your time? I'm considering applying for the job. Don't tell me that. Tell me you already applied for the job, why you fit the role, what you bring to the table, how you're going to help us achieve what you picked from the role on the job description, and ask me if I'd be open to interviewing you or having a conversation with you. That's very different. So putting the work even in those types of messages that you send out, that way I think you're going to get a lot more opportunity in conversations. Don't be afraid of that, because the worst that'll happen is they'll either say no or not respond. And that's okay. Eventually someone will.
Yeah, I love that. And Jake, how can our audience today connect with you?
Well, check us out. I'm on LinkedIn, so definitely hit me up on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to connect. But also be joining up with 2 partners here soon. So check out our website called revenue-reimagine.com to learn more about what we do as fractional CROs and how we can help businesses grow and scale their revenue from a go-to-market perspective, and just do it in a very sustainable way.
Awesome. We'll put those in the show notes for our audience. And I want to thank everyone out there for joining us. And Jake, thank you for sharing some time with us to talk about your sales process and a lot of learnings that the folks out there could benefit from.
Right on. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thanks, Jake.
Thank you so much. We'll talk to you all soon.